the room that have got their backs to us, so it might be a bit awkward talking to them, but we can hear each other over the headset.
Gary obviously can go at the end of that.
Yeah,
No
so you
worries.
can go at the end of that. You don't need to hang around.
Okay, no problems.
So,
Right, let's. Oof.
Right.
so it's going live in 20 seconds.
I'll be doing a bit of filming. Don't let me put you on.
Okay, no problem.
So, our radio student press and then I'll press that, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Then you might just need
And
to,
yeah, I just need to remember to cut that bit out.
yeah. I'll just keep us both on. Where's he gone? Oh, doesn't matter. Do these need to come down when I play this?
I don't know.
How are we doing? Welcome to the start of the weekend. We are the World Cup Qatar, Qatar, a podcast produced and presented by sports journalism students live from our radio studios in Preston. I'm Jack Goodwin.
And I'm Matt Ward, and in a moment we'll be talking to our studio guest. But first of all, we're going to bring in England's lead producer for the BBC Radio, Gary Flintoff. So, Gary, we're going to start with you. Just sort of to start with, give us your views. Obviously, the England squad got announced yesterday. Give us sort of your views on the squad.
Well, it was a very busy day yesterday. It always is, to be fair, the most attended in terms of the media who are on site to see a World Cup squad being announced, even more so than the Euros, I think it's safe to say. But in terms of the squad itself, for me, the overriding feel afterwards, talking to my journalistic colleagues, those who write for a living, those who broadcast for a living, was that everyone was pretty much satisfied, really. And the sort of wave of euphoria about James Maddison was certainly dealt with. And in some ways, when Gareth Southgate said, well, I picked him 2 weeks ago, it sort of took the wind out of a lot of people's sails, in all honesty, who were sort of clamouring for his name to be in the squad. So I think it's a good squad. If anything, it's slightly more attacking than perhaps we would have expected Gareth Southgate to go with, if you look at the squads of the past, but not that dissimilar from the squads he named for both the Euros and, of course, the World Cup in Russia.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned it's a little bit more attacking than Gareth Southgate's obviously gone for the Nations League. So do you think the conservative approach that he's sort of taken for the Nations League campaign, do you think that will come back into play, or do you think it will be more of an attacking style with obviously players like Maddison and Mount getting picked?
I think for him primarily, from what he was saying yesterday, is you have to get out the group first, and that is the priority. And obviously you'd like to do that by playing really good football, but you have to make sure you play winning football, or effective football, if you will. And then maybe the players can express themselves a little bit more as the tournament progresses. I think if you look at Iran, if you look at USA and Wales, they're not the same calibre as Italy or Germany or even Hungary, who, to be fair, were in the moment when they won by 4-0 at Molineux. And I'm not saying that Hungary are eating or sitting at the top table of world football, but as a team, they were particularly impressive in both games against England, to be fair. But the factor, or the one thing you have to factor in, is it's a World Cup. Players will give their absolute everything when they play for their country, particularly when they play against England. And that's where you hope the quality shines through. And you would hope that some of those attacking players, who we didn't see a great deal of during that Nations League campaign, in all honesty, actually come to the fore. And rather like Mason Mount did in that game against Germany, produce something, spectacular, which, to be fair to the England manager, he hadn't seen from any of his forward players, I don't think, throughout the entire Nations League campaign until that point.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting World Cup, especially on the pitch, as you say. That Nations League group probably a bit more difficult than the World Cup Group B that we've been put in. But just off the pitch, Gary, it's now consecutive World Cups that have been shrouded in controversy. Are you and your team comfortable going to this country with their human rights record?
It's funny, we had a meeting earlier this week, and I wouldn't say comfortable, but it is something which, we're paid to do, first and foremost. I have attended, every England game that they have played for many, many years now, and it is my job. But on a personal level, clearly there are things which have gone on. The regime in Qatar has many, many questions, which it may have answered some. I don't think it's answered all of them. But in some ways, you know, we go to a country which has sort of closer links to the UK in recent history than perhaps Russia has. And I suppose, like many people, you hope that the influence of the Western world, and maybe even the South American world, you know, travelling as fans, as people to the state of Qatar, can help them move forwards and develop their ideas and their thoughts and their processes. Albeit, you know, you still have to be respectful to a certain degree to their customs and the way in which they choose to live their lives. But that doesn't mean that you agree with everything that they stand for as a nation, or certainly as a ruling group, as a ruling royal family, and as those who lead the country.
Yeah, and the former head of FIFA, Sepp Blatter, has come out in the last couple of days saying it was a mistake giving Qatar the World Cup. What are your thoughts on that? Is it a bit too late from him?
Well, where has Sepp been for the past 12 years? He looked quite delighted at the time, if my memory serves me correctly, as he announced the result on the stage all those years ago. And he's obviously said to the BBC this week that he advised against Qatar. But interestingly enough, from what I've seen and heard of the interview so far, it was more down to the size of the country rather than the regime itself, the rulers of the country. And I mean, the only thing I would say about the whole thing is that clearly the leaders of the country, they make the rules. But in terms of the Qatari people themselves, and bear in mind, you know, for 2.6 million people who live in Qatar, only 300,000 or there or thereabouts are actually Qatari. The people that we met when I was last in Qatar for the World Cup draw in April were good people. They were very, very welcoming, and they all were looking forward to having the World Cup in their country. Probably many surprised to be having the World Cup in their country, but they were very welcoming, very warm, very friendly. And rather like Russia, you can't necessarily judge the people of a country by its leaders. We may even point to that fact here in the United Kingdom at the moment, but I know a lot of people in Russia, kept in touch with quite a few people who I met and stayed friends with after the World Cup, who do not agree with Vladimir Putin's actions, and one or two of them actually left the country because of that, which is a bold move in itself. So I think to a certain degree you do have to separate the people of the country from the leaders of the country.
Yeah, and just sort of moving on to a more personal question now, Gary. Obviously, you're going to be there for a couple of weeks in Qatar. How's that going to impact your family? You know, are your family going to miss you? You know, what sort of, are you going to, you know, be FaceTiming them every night after a game?
Certainly, probably not after the game, because most of the games I'm covering at 10 o'clock at night in Qatar. So that normally means a 3 o'clock finish in the morning. So earlier in the day, absolutely no doubt about that, yes. Gone for 5 weeks. It's sort of becoming the norm, because when I initially started doing this job, it was only men's football. But obviously women's football has a higher profile now than it ever has done. And whereas you used to have one summer off, that doesn't really happen anymore. Having said that, this is the run-up to Christmas. So 5 weeks I'm away for, and my main promise to my wife was to ensure that we did all the Christmas shopping before I went, which is Monday. We're just about there. It cost me an absolute fortune, and yes, I'm sure they will miss me, although to some degree I think they quite like the fact, I've got a son and a daughter. I think they quite like the fact that they can watch England and they know I'm sort of there watching the game as well. But 5 weeks is a long time, and particularly before Christmas. I don't arrive back in the UK until the 20th of December, so you're going to miss quite a few things there in terms of Christmas concerts and carol services and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, I will miss them. I'll definitely miss them. Whether they miss me, probably, if you really had to push them on that answer.
Yeah, and just sort of more of a quirky question now. Is there a certain item that you take with you every time you travel away from with England?
Yes, every time I travel, I take my pillow with me, because quite literally I've had a pain in the neck for many, many decades because I suffer from RSI, and I have a specialist pillow. So my pillow travels absolutely everywhere. So it always is the butt of many jokes when I turn up to any away game in Europe or in the world with a huge suitcase. Both my commentator colleagues and our summarisers who work for us on 5 Live go, why on earth have you brought a case that size when you're away for 2 nights? And my answer is always, I bring a very big pillow.
Good choice for a luxury item. You've mentioned that you're going to be there for 5 weeks, you and your team. Do you think England are going to be there for 5 weeks? Do you think they've got a good chance?
I think their mentality will be that they can be there for 5 weeks. I'm probably on the par with many others that sort of think the quarterfinals could be the ceiling of their aspirations. Having said that, if they were to get that far, and I think they're capable, then that is hopefully, and maybe a big if, but hopefully, if they have learnt anything from their last 2 tournaments, where they almost managed to win the Euros, but not quite, and almost reached the World Cup final, but not quite, if they have learnt from those games at the upper echelons, the tightest moments in the game, and if they have learned from those moments, then they could go beyond the quarterfinals.
Let's hope so. That's all we have time for today, Gary. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problems at all.
Yeah, and
Thanks very much indeed for the invitation.
We hope you have a safe flight and can bring England some good luck.
Yes. Hopefully I can... Well, so far my recent record's not bad, is it? A final and a semi-final with the men's game, and obviously with the women's, a final and a win and a semi-final. So, recent tournaments have been very good in terms of being an England football producer.
Good. Well, good luck, enjoy it, and hopefully we'll come away with the trophy.
Cheers, Gary, thank you.
So that was England's football producer for BBC Radio. We're now just going to bring in our 4 studio guests, our journalist friends, who are going to introduce themselves one by one. So if we go from the left-hand side here in the studio.
I'm Taku Jobgo. Hello, everyone.
I'm Callum Insall.
I'm Alex McMonnies.
And I'm Dan Baldwin.
So these are all part of our sports journalism course here at UCLan, and we're very lucky to be able to host this podcast for the next 4 weeks or so. Guys, he's just mentioned that he's pretty happy with his squad selection. Cal, just going to come to you first. Do you agree with him? Do you think it's a good 26-man squad?
Yeah, personally, I don't think there's much else he could have done. I think there obviously are a couple of areas he could have changed. I think whatever decision he made, he was going to upset some people, whether it's a defensive decision, an attacking decision or whatever. But I think he's done as good a job as he can. Like Gary said, it is quite an attacking selection. But no, I think it's the right one.
Yeah, cheers there, Carl. Just to bring in the others, sort of what are all your thoughts? Anyone can jump in. Do you have the same sort of thoughts? Do you share the same thoughts with Cal?
Yeah, just to jump in there, I think with the squad when it was announced, even before that, the overriding opinion was that Maddison has to go to this tournament. And you could see all over social media with the trends. Maddison was one of the number 1 trends in the UK for this. So I think it was a good idea of Southgate to take him, because you don't need the negative opinion, obviously, from the supporters who would like to see him. So I think, like Gary said, it really did take the wind out of a lot of people's sails. And I think that can only be positive for the camp in general to keep him around, and hopefully he can be useful as the tournament progresses.
Yeah, cheers thank you for that, Don. So, right, obviously, first game, November 21st versus Iran. Let's go from sort of 1 to 1. We'll start with you, Taku. Tell us your starting 11 first of all. What formation are you going for?
Well, I'm going for 4-2-3-1, as we use for a lot of the Euros. And I feel like the back line is going to be similar to most people's. Pickford, Trippier, Maguire, Stones and Shaw. And then in the pivot, I've gone for Bellingham and Rice. And I've gone for Maddison at the number 10 and Saka, Sterling. Saka on the right, Sterling on the left, and Kane up front.
Cal?
Very similar. 4-3-3 I've gone for, with Pickford, Trippier, Maguire, Stones and Shaw, Bellingham and Rice in the middle with Mason Mount, and then I've gone with Kane up front with Foden and Raheem Sterling out wide.
Alex?
That's probably like similar formations to what I'd personally go for, but looking at what the type of team that Southgate's picked during the Nations League, I'd imagine that he'd be going more towards a 5-back. I think it'd probably depend more on whether Kyle Walker is fit or not, but I think you go obviously Pickford in goal, Alexander-Arnold, Walker, Stones, Maguire, Shaw in the kind of back five, Bellingham and Rice ahead of them, and then Foden, Kane and Sterling up front.
And finally, Dan, what about you?
Yeah, just looking off the previous records of the fixtures before this tournament, he does seem to like his three at the back system. So I've obviously gone with Pickford in net, Stones, Maguire, and possibly Eric Dyer if Walker is still injured for a considerable amount of time. And then you've got Shaw and Trippier on either side, with Sterling, Foden, and then potentially Kane up front as well.
Quite interesting that two of you picked Harry Maguire there. I think it was Cal and Dan. He's come under a lot of scrutiny for the past two years, ever since that excellent Euros tournament that he had where he led England to 5 clean sheets in 7. Coming to you, Dan, why have you picked him in your squad? Do you think, even though he's not playing every week for Manchester United, do you think he's still a good addition to England's team?
Well, that's ultimately the dilemma that a lot of people have been having recently. It's whether or not Southgate is actually picking on club form or previous international records. And I think he's just a solid part of the puzzle for this tournament. And in centre-back especially, with what he's done previously, I think that he would be missing if he wasn't there. And I think it is important to have that core foundation to build upon. So yes, he's not been doing too well by his standards in club football, but I think internationally he doesn't often put a foot wrong, and I think that can't be ignored.
And I think you all put Pickford in net, obviously. The other goalkeepers are obviously Nick Pope and Aaron Ramsdale. Do you think them two have done anything to take Pickford's place, or do you think sort of Pickford's a solid option? We'll come to you, Alex.
Well, I'd imagine that, like I say, I think the main argument is probably that Pickford hasn't really put a foot wrong in pretty much his whole England career, I'd say, and I think club form has done little to say that he should not be starting. I'd imagine that Aaron Ramsdale would come in if say we win our first 2 games and the final match is kind of a chance to give other players a go, rest a few of the key players. I'd imagine maybe Ramsdale would be given a go. Obviously Nick Pope, you could argue about with Newcastle doing so well, but obviously he played in the Nations League against Germany and was given a chance while Pickford was injured and probably didn't live up to expectations so much. So I can't really see him being given a go. There's always 3 goalkeepers at a tournament, but I could see Ramsdale being given a go if we're able to do so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a stark contrast to 2 years ago at the Euros where everyone was saying goalkeeper was the weakest position. I think you've now got 3 good goalkeepers that are playing at probably their best level at the moment in England. Alex, just sticking with you, you were the only one to pick Trent Alexander-Arnold, Champions League, Premier League winning full-back for Liverpool, but never really been trusted by Gareth Southgate. Why have you gone for Alexander-Arnold?
Well, I think it kind of depends on the formation. I think if Southgate does line up with a 4-back, I think there's no chance that he can start. I think defensive frailties would be too much there, and you'd probably be leaning towards Trippier. And similarly, it does kind of depend on if Walker's fit and he's got Walker behind him to cover and kind of allow Alexander-Arnold to get further forward, because no one can argue really that going forward he's probably one of our biggest threats, like creativity wise and crossing ability and stuff. And it is really just from a defensive standpoint that he's weak. So depending on the formation, if you have more numbers back, then I think having that creativity will be really important for us. So yeah, that's why I picked him.
You say that he can't play in a back 4. You say there's no chance, but he plays in a back 4 week in, week out for Liverpool.
Yeah, but I think we've shown a lot this season that he's been exposed a lot in that formation, and I think he's often had Henderson on the right side of the midfield covering him, which depending on injuries and stuff hasn't really been that much of a case so much this season. There's been a lot of chop and change in that Liverpool midfield, and similarly, he often has a quick player in Joe Gomez in the centre back position alongside him to cover him almost, and that's kind of what I was touching on with Kyle Walker being in the side. So I can understand that argument, but like you say, Southgate doesn't seem to really trust him if he would be playing a 4-back, and even in a 5-back, he hasn't been given much of a go for England. So yeah, it's I can see why a lot of people aren't really going for him. But like I say, I think going forward wise, I think he could be essential for us.
And now, Taku, you picked Maddison in your starting 11. First of all, why did you pick Maddison, and why have you not put Mount in?
Well, I feel like the team, like Alex was saying, we need creativity. We've picked a very attacking team, and we need to put the best players out there. I feel like Maddison adds creativity that no one else in the team could add from midfield. And I feel like from what we saw of Mount from the Euros, I don't think he should be one of the first names in the midfield. I think if you don't go Maddison, you put Foden in the midfield. I just don't think Mount is that creative player that will give us the edge that we need, and I think Maddison has definitely shown that he is.
Do you see this a lot of national team squads where, with a lot of managers at the top of the game, they don't pick players based on their form for the clubs. And as you say, I think there's no doubt that James Maddison's probably the most in-form English player at the moment. But is it a risk, Taku, to go with James Maddison when he hasn't been part of the England setup for so long now?
I think it's a risk because he hasn't been part of this particular setup, yeah. But I wouldn't say that. You're talking about form. I wouldn't say it's about form. Maddison has been a quality player for a while now, and it was kind of an injustice that he hasn't been called up to England as much as he should have. So I wouldn't say it's just on form, but yeah, it is a risk just because he's picked a set team for a while now. So anyone that comes in that's trying to get into that team is going to be a risk.
Okay, so moving away from sort of the starting 11s for the first game, let's put in a hypothetical world. Say you can make one change to the 26-man squad for England. Who are you putting in and who are you taking out? We'll come to you, Cal.
I think the only change I probably would make is the admission of Fikayo Tomori. I think he's probably a centre-back most people would have expected Southgate to pick. In saying that, you know, who do you take out to put him in? You could argue Connor Cody, Eric Dyer, but, you know, for me, I think obviously Stones and Maguire and obviously Walker, if he is to play a 5-back, they have to go. But I think, you know, Maguire's obviously not been in form for Man United, but that sort of experience level, and obviously Southgate's at the point in his tenure as England manager where, you know, to stay in the job, he's got to do, well, he's either got to win the World Cup or, you know, at least get to the final, in my opinion. So he's going to pick players he trusts, and I don't think Maguire's really done much wrong for England. So, you know, that probably puts Tomori on the back foot already. But, you know, not necessarily sure who I'd take out, but I'd definitely bring Tomori in. That's probably the one change I would make.
Anyone else in agreement? Would you put Tomori in?
Yeah, I think alone with what he's done in the Serie A with AC Milan, I think he really went out there to prove himself. And I think he's done just that. So he will feel a little bit disappointed that he wasn't included. And rightfully so, but I think he can really push on from this and use it as a stepping stone to hopefully get in one more in the future. So in a way, I do understand where Southgate was coming from. He has a lot of pressure on his shoulders, and he will want to pick the winning players in a winning system that he's used time and time again. And Tomori perhaps won't fit into that. But you could also see both sides of the argument, really. You have Tomori fans themselves very disappointed, but you can also understand in a way that the manager has to make difficult choices. And for this circumstance, I think he has.
And you see a lot of people arguing that Fikayo Tomori should be in the squad because he won the Serie A last year. Realistically, with how Italian sides do in Europe compared to English sides, would they win the Premier League? Because would they even make the Champions League, Cal?
Yeah, no, you're right. That is a point, you know, I made off camera. It's whether, you know, they would make it up there. I think there's, similar to the Premier League, you know, there's 5 or 6 strong teams in the Italian league, but away from that, you know, I don't think there's too many sides that would cause, you know, AC Milan and Tomori many problems. So obviously, you know, looking at those in the Premier League, you know, even the likes of West Ham and Leicester and Newcastle, I think a lot of those teams would give AC Milan problems. Obviously, they've been in a Champions League group with Chelsea and they've made it through. But yeah, I think he's won, you know, a league title, that you can't take that away from him. But I think, you know, if he was to go, you know, Fikayo Tomori, I think he's got a lot of experience. And obviously, you know, looking at those in the Premier League, you know, even the likes of West Ham and Leicester and Newcastle, I think a lot of those teams would give AC Milan problems. Obviously, they've been in a Champions League group with Chelsea and they've made it through. But yeah, I think he's won, you know, a league title, that you can't take that away from him. But I think it's good, but I just don't know whether. Well, it's clearly not enough in Southgate's eyes, but I think, is he to do it in the Premier League? That might have been, slightly different. But yeah, you're right. I think AC Milan would probably struggle, to get top 4 in the Premier League.
But I'd have to disagree with what Kyle would say, because I do think it's an injustice that we're looking at these leagues a lot different, because especially in Tomori's case, because if we look at it, at Derby he done well, at Chelsea he done well. He was taking out the lineup for Chelsea, but I think a lot of Chelsea fans would tell you that they're not quite sure why he was taking out the lineup, because he done really well in the Premier League. And then to go from doing well in the Premier League to win a league title, I think that's big. Like, we look at Trippier, obviously he was different because he had that England pedigree, but he went to La Liga. We never talked down on his accomplishments winning the league there. So I don't think we should do the same with Tomori. I think he's one of England's best centre-backs.
So, we're going to move on to one of our other nations not far away across the border in Wales. And I think Alex and Dan have been researching on Wales. So we're just going to come to you, Alex. You've not really spoke a lot. What are Wales' chances in this World Cup?
Well, of course, it's their first World Cup in since 1958, so a long, long time. And of course, historically, Wales have not been the most successful national side. But of course, in recent years, I think no one could argue that it's probably a golden generation for Wales, led by Gareth Bale, of course, at the last 2 Euro tournaments, they've reached the knockout stages both times. So I think their tournament experience isn't really to be discounted. Obviously, it is quite a difficult group being with England again. I think a lot of people will be looking at United States as well as maybe someone who can, cause a bit of an upset as well. But and of course, based on recent form as well, obviously Wales were quite good during qualifying, but during their Nations League campaign, being in quite a tough group, admittedly with Belgium, Netherlands and Poland, they struggled quite a bit. So, and obviously, of course, you've got the main names that have been like mainstays of the Wales team for a while now. Your Gareth Bales, and your Aaron Ramseys, Ben Davies and that. But
Dan, you follow after this.
Obviously, they're not. Bale and Ramsey in particular aren't exactly playing too much. Bale, obviously, in America now, and Aaron Ramsey at Nice, probably not really getting the regular time that you'd expect from key players and other sides. But you can never really discount Wales. Obviously, getting to the semi-finals all those years ago, they've shown before that their tournament pedigree is actually pretty good. So could be an upset on the cards. We'll see.
Yes, and manager Robert Page himself actually stated that he's already decided the majority of the 26 players that he would be taking to Qatar ahead of actually releasing the full squad. So, yeah, it's very much a solid, rigid side with not too many surprise inclusions or omissions. And it's also worth mentioning in the Nations League groups that they had, the likes of Belgium, Netherlands, Poland. They did finish bottom with a point, but I thought they gave some really solid performances they should have been proud of. Some narrow defeats, of course, but the draw against Belgium, the 1-1 draw, really did show that if they're on the top of the game, they could give anybody a solid competition.
And final question for you all, one-word answers. We'll go from Taku, Cal, Alex, Dan. How far are England and Wales getting? Taku, go
on. Wales out in the group stage, England just to the next round and out.
Wales out in the group stage, England semi-final.
Wales out in the group stage and England quarter-finals.
I agree with Alex. I think Wales out in the group stage and England quarter-finals.
And the majority of you haven't predicted, none of you have predicted any success in terms of silverware for England. Going again from left to right, do we think Gareth Southgate keeps his job if that's what happens?
Nope.
Unfortunately not.
Nope.
I don't think he does.
Not looking bright for England. Thanks so much for listening to our first ever Qatar Qatar podcast. First of all, thank you to our studio guest, Gary Flintoff. Thank you to Taku, Callum, Alex and Dan. And thank you to Matt for joining us today. We hope you have enjoyed it and we'll be back with you over the next 5 weeks as we cover the World Cup on a daily basis. Thanks so much and go well.